My first thought was, we are so lucky to be here. We're so lucky because had that 17-year-old girl, or then 17, she's 18 now, not taken that video, had she not gone to that store, had she not charged up her phone to have enough power to record George Floyd being murdered, we likely would not have had a trial and certainly wouldn't have had a verdict. You have to remember, Chauvin was the first white officer in the history of Minnesota to be charged with the death of a Black civilian. So the simple fact that he was charged was already somewhat of a miracle. But we got to that miracle because of an accidental serendipitous encounter with a 17-year-old girl with enough charge in her phone to record it. So I can't talk about justice. I can't be overly celebratory because I know there's a very good chance we wouldn't even have been here. That this wasn't because the system worked. This was because the people worked. So the system in place still needs a lot of changes. I mean, Aaron, when you read the initial statements from the Minneapolis police in regards to what happened on May 25th, 2020, it says that it appeared as if George Floyd was experiencing some sort of medical incident, having medical difficulties. The statement says nothing about Derek Chauvin's knee being on his neck for almost 10 minutes.
Right. And I hadn't seen that I don't know if I saw that last year, but I certainly haven't seen it in a year. And after the verdict came out, there were a lot of posts on social media as a reminder, like, hey, by the way, this was what the police department initially said.
Absolutely. So do you believe that the three other officers who are all junior compared to Mr. Chauvin, some of whom hadn't even been on, one of them wasn't even on the force for a week, do you believe that person, those people who didn't have enough courage to tell Mr. Chauvin to stop, do you really feel like after the fact they would have said, oh yeah, by the way, he really did some things we weren't trained to do? Do you really think they would have said that? Since they didn't rise up to stop the killing, are they going to rise up to point a finger at who murdered him? No. So my initial thoughts and really my dominant thoughts are really, grateful to God and grateful for, I believe her name is Donnella Frazier, for taking the video. Because had it not been for the video, Derek Chauvin might still be out there patrolling these streets today.
Something I also saw a lot of yesterday that I hadn't seen before, and that's not to say that it wasn't out there, I just hadn't seen it, was the idea that this is not so much justice as it is accountability.
Right.
When did that start? The idea of, hey, this isn't necessarily justice, this is accountability. Has it been out there prior to yesterday, or was yesterday its coming out party, if you will?
I think yesterday people noticed it more. Activists that I've spoken to over the years, and I'm talking years and years and years, have been speaking in those terms for some time. Yeah, when I think about just all of it, right? Yes, activists, organizers, even some local politicians had been using that language. But you're right, it certainly has risen, during the George Floyd, since his death. Certainly was talked about a lot in the Chauvin trial. But it really is a brilliant way of reframing the entire conversation, if you will. Because to say justice is to infer an injustice has been done, which, just on its head has the potential to offend those you're talking about, right? Because they're automatically being accused of being unjust. But accountability isn't splitting hairs, it's refining the issue. It's saying this isn't about the profession not being noble. No, it's about holding the people who are in this profession accountable to the ideas and the principles and the policies and the training of this noble profession, holding them accountable to what they promised, which is to serve and protect. Now that's a reshaping. And I hope that it isn't just simply moving chairs on a sinking ship. My hope is that it really does symbolize some sort of paradigm shift, because we already know that there have been tens of killings of this nature since the trial began.
Right, and the idea that I think yesterday during the verdict there was another
16-year-old girl. Absolutely. You know, we're still waiting to hear details on that, though we do know that reportedly she was under attack. She was the one that called the police, and she's the one that ended up dead. 4 bullets to the chest. Within, I believe the reports are within 10 to 15 seconds of the police arriving. So certainly not enough time to de-escalate, certainly not enough time to ask questions to see what was going on, all based upon the assumptions of what they were witnessing. And you have to ask yourself, okay, what was informing those assumptions?
Right.
How much of that was police training? How much of that was personal bias?
It's been nearly a year for the Derek Chauvin trial to actually happen, and then 3 weeks of trial. Take me through your mindset, your emotions, all the different things that went into the few hours between, hey, we've got a verdict, and the actual reading of the verdict. And then take me through your emotions as you heard those words that he was guilty on all 3 counts.
Well, I would start in reverse. Emotions, I was at most relieved, but probably mostly unemotional.
Why is that?
Because there's a video of a man being murdered that takes place over 9 minutes and 29 seconds. Like it's like the bare minimum required as a human being to watch this video and then walk away thinking, yeah, that guy killed that guy. I know we had a trial full of science and it was really important that we scientifically explain what happened to him, but we also instinctively knew what happened. We saw it with our own eyes. And so to feel a certain amount of elation because these jurors use their common sense, you know, it's sort of like that just tells you just how bad our criminal justice system has been for people of color, where we need to be happy that a video documenting a death, a murder, was honored and recognized for its integrity. So I was somewhat disconnected, relief at most, but probably overwhelmingly just not emotional at all. But during the course of the day, once I got the bulletin that, you know, the verdict was going to be announced within 90 minutes, we're in the middle of a remodel. So I was in Home Depot and I had been putting off looking for countertops, you know, because it's just like, that's not fun. That's not sexy, right? But it's at the point now where I really have no choice. Otherwise, I'm not going to have a countertop, right? So I'm going through, I'm looking, I'm trying to pick it out, and I get this bulletin, and I go, okay, I got 90 minutes, right? I know I needed to be on air. That was already decided. So that means I basically got 45 to an hour to pick this out and get back to the house, take a shower, dress, and be ready to be on air for when. And as hard as I tried to stay focused in on finding this countertop that I've been putting off, I couldn't stop the anxiety. So I just left without even doing it because it was impossible for me to think that countertops were important in that moment. And as I was driving home, you know, I was listening to Otis Redding. I was listening to Sam Cooke, you know, and then I came home and I got dressed and I just sat and I just waited. And when the first guilty came in, I exhaled and then I just listened and then I just gathered my thoughts and prepared to go on air.
Where did that anxiety go? What do you do with it? How do you handle it?
I forgot which corridor I stored that one, but I have all these emotional corridors where I compartmentalize all my trauma. So it's in there somewhere. I'm sure if I look it up, you know, the files, I'll be able to pull it out for you. But I just kind of quickly put it away in the file along with all the other trauma that I've experienced in dealing with law enforcement. And I don't want people to think that I'm anti-law enforcement. I don't want people to think I'm anti-police. I have friends who are police officers. I have family members that are police officers. More importantly, I have a tremendous amount of respect for police officers. I have been a crimes reporter. I've been out in the streets with police officers. I've been to shootings. I've been to murders. I've been to death with police officers. I understand all that goes into it. I'm speaking specifically of both the bad acting agents, the bad officers, as well as the so-called good officers who aren't quite good enough to call out the bad ones, who are not just harming civilians, but really damaging their entire industry, their entire profession.
Pardon the pun, but the idea of this black and white, like you cannot be both. You cannot be both supportive of law enforcement and call out law enforcement for when people, whether it's people of color or otherwise, but obviously with the stats, you know, a much higher rate, people of color die in police custody or die at the hands of police. Where do you just to speak on the idea that many people say it's black or white? You can't do or be or feel both.
One of the things our founding fathers warned us about, warned future generations about, was the pitfalls of a two-party system. And they got a lot wrong, obviously. I'm living proof. I'm not 3/5, I'm actually completely human. But they got a lot right, which is why, you know, a lot of us today still quote them and still point to them, because a lot of the philosophies they talked about was right. And the dangers of a two-party system is that it places the electorate in a position of having to choose between, unfortunately, two extremes. Because more often than not, the truth and our sensibilities as humans lies in between those spaces. So they've always, you know, encouraged us to make sure there were multiple parties so that people weren't, you know, ghettoized in these two positions. And to answer your question, that is just another example as to why we need space for more choices, so that we don't have to take harbor underneath these two extremes, because most of us are somewhere in the middle. Just as you know, there are restaurants that suck, that doesn't mean that all restaurants suck. You know, just because you know there are some awful teachers doesn't mean the profession of teaching isn't necessary or needs to be destroyed or disbanded. So the same thing applies to when it comes to law enforcement. There are wonderful officers out there who are taking less money than probably what they could earn as being public servants, who are risking their lives every single day. They put on that uniform, they put on that badge, who many of whom don't think a second thought when it comes to putting themselves in harm's way to protect people. We're not talking about those people, those women and men. We're talking about the ones who push you in front of the bus and then blame you for getting the street dirty. That's who we're talking about.